Deep in the Texas wilderness, a rotting beehive box hid a nightmare: human bones sealed in concrete. 6 years after photographer Ben Foster vanished in Big Thicket National Forest, this gruesome discovery revealed a killer's chilling secret. The murderer was already dead, but the evidence left behind exposed a crime more horrifying than anyone imagined. Ben Foster had always seen the world through different eyes. At 34, the amateur photographer from Austin had built a modest but devoted following on social media by capturing the hidden beauty of Texas's most overlooked landscapes. While other photographers flocked to the state's iconic desert vistas and hill country sunsets, Ben specialized in finding magic in places most people considered uninviting or even forbidding. His Instagram account, @BenBehindTheLens, showcased the ethereal beauty of abandoned buildings slowly being consumed by nature. The haunting silhouettes of dead trees in drought-stricken lakes, and the mysterious allure of fog-shrouded swamplands that most Texans preferred to avoid. His photographs had a unique quality. They made the ordinary seem otherworldly, and the unwelcoming seem almost mystical. Ben's passion for photography had developed during his recovery from a serious car accident 3 years earlier. The crash had left him with a permanent limp and chronic pain that ended his career as a construction supervisor, but it had also given him something unexpected: time to pursue the creative passion he'd always pushed aside for more practical concerns. His disability settlement provided enough income to cover his basic needs, and his reduced mobility had actually enhanced his photography in unexpected ways. Unable to hike long distances or scramble over challenging terrain, Ben had learned to find extraordinary shots in accessible locations that other photographers often overlooked. He had developed an almost supernatural ability to spot potential in places that seemed completely ordinary to everyone else. In September 2017, Ben had become fascinated with the Big Thicket National Preserve, a 100,000-acre wilderness area in East Texas that locals often called the biological crossroads of North America. The preserve was a unique ecosystem where eastern forests met western plains, where swampland merged with pine forests, and where more than 1,000 species of flowering plants created one of the most biodiverse regions in North America. For Ben, the Big Thicket represented the ultimate photography challenge. His research had revealed dozens of abandoned settlements, forgotten cemeteries, and decaying structures scattered throughout the preserve, exactly the kind of subjects that made his work stand out from typical landscape photography. He had been planning his Big Thicket expedition for weeks, studying topographical maps, researching historical sites, and plotting routes that would take him to the most photographically interesting locations while staying within his physical limitations. His plan was to spend 3 days exploring different sections of the preserve, documenting the hidden beauty of this often misunderstood wilderness. Ben's final social media post, uploaded at 6:47 a.m. on September 15, 2017, showed him loading his camera gear into his silver Honda CR-V. The caption read, "Heading into the Big Thicket for 3 days of exploring. This place has been calling to me for months. Can't wait to see what stories the swamp wants to tell." It was the last time anyone would see Ben Foster alive. The search for Ben Foster began when his sister Michelle contacted authorities after he failed to return from his planned 3-day photography expedition. Ben was notoriously reliable about his return schedules, always checking in when promised, and never extending trips without notification. Sheriff's Deputy Maria Santos coordinated the initial search, which quickly expanded into one of the largest rescue operations in Big Thicket history. Ben's abandoned Honda CR-V was found in the Turkey Creek Unit parking area, unlocked with his expensive camera gear visible inside. This immediately struck investigators as unusual. Ben would never have left thousands of dollars worth of equipment unsecured, and he certainly wouldn't have ventured far into the wilderness without his primary camera. The search teams faced daunting terrain. The big thicket's dense forests, maze-like waterways, and confusing network of old logging roads had claimed dozens of hikers over the decades. Ancient cypress trees created cathedral-like formations that could hide a person just yards from main trails, while thick undergrowth made visibility extremely limited. For days, search teams combed every accessible area. They used thermal imaging equipment, deployed search dogs, and conducted helicopter overflights that revealed the true scope of the wilderness they were searching. From above, the big thicket appeared as an endless green maze where individual landmarks disappeared into an indistinguishable canopy. The dogs picked up Ben's scent at several locations along established trails, confirming that he had indeed entered the preserve. But the scent trails inevitably led to dead ends, points where Ben's presence simply vanished as if he had been lifted from the earth. After 2 weeks of intensive searching with no results, the case might have remained another unsolved big thicket disappearance. But then Claude Thibodeau came forward with information that would completely transform the investigation. Claude Thibodeau was a 67-year-old local who had lived on the edges of the big thicket his entire life. His family had been in East Texas for 4 generations, and Claude knew every trail, creek, and hidden corner of the vast wilderness. He also knew the people who lived in its most remote areas, including some individuals that most folks preferred to avoid. When Claude learned about the missing photographer through local news coverage, he wrestled with his conscience for 2 weeks before finally deciding to share what he had witnessed on September 15th. According to Claude, he had been checking his fishing lines along Village Creek that afternoon when he witnessed a heated confrontation between 2 men near an old logging road. One man was clearly a visitor. He carried expensive camera equipment and wore clean outdoor clothing that marked him as a city person. The other man was someone Claude recognized immediately: Ethan Parker. Parker was a local recluse who lived on a deteriorating property about 3 miles from the Village Creek area. He was known throughout the community as someone to avoid, a man whose mental state had deteriorated significantly over the years and who had become increasingly hostile toward outsiders visiting what he considered his swamp. Claude described watching the confrontation escalate over several minutes. The photographer appeared to be asking questions and taking pictures, while Parker became more agitated and aggressive. Claude couldn't hear specific words from his position, but the body language was unmistakably threatening. The confrontation ended with Parker grabbing the photographer's arm and apparently ordering him to leave the area. The photographer initially resisted, pointing his camera towards something that had caught his interest, but Parker's escalating aggression seemed to convince him to comply. Claude watched both men disappear into different sections of the forest, the photographer heading toward the parking area, while Parker vanished into dense undergrowth that led toward his property. Claude assumed the incident had ended with the visitor taking Parker's advice to leave. But now, learning that the photographer had never made it home, Claude realized he might have witnessed the beginning of something far more sinister. Ethan Parker's transformation from struggling businessman to dangerous recluse was well known among longtime Big Thicket residents, though most knew only fragments of the tragedy that had shaped his descent into paranoia and violence. Born in 1965, Ethan had grown up expecting to inherit his family's small sawmill operation that processed timber from private lands surrounding the Big Thicket. But the timber industry's decline in the 1980s and early 1990s had devastated small operators like the Parker family. Environmental regulations, competition from larger corporate operations, and changing market demands gradually strangled the family business. By 1994, Ethan's father was forced to sell the sawmill equipment to pay accumulated debts, ending 3 generations of Parker family enterprise. The loss broke his father's spirit, leading to heavy drinking and eventual death from a heart attack in 1997. Ethan's mother, overwhelmed by grief and financial pressure, moved to Houston to live with relatives, leaving Ethan alone on the family property. At 32, Ethan found himself isolated on 40 acres of heavily wooded land with a deteriorating house, mounting debts, and no clear path forward. His response was to retreat further from mainstream society, becoming increasingly hostile toward outsiders and developing elaborate conspiracy theories about government land grabs and environmental extremists. Local law enforcement had encountered Parker multiple times over the years, usually in connection with complaints about trespassing, illegal hunting, or confrontations with hikers who had ventured too close to his property. The incidents rarely resulted in formal charges, but they established a pattern of escalating hostility toward visitors. When investigators arrived at Parker's property to question him about Ben Foster, they found a scene that reinforced every concerning detail in his law enforcement file. The property was accessible only via a narrow dirt road that wound through dense forest for nearly 2 miles. The road was deliberately maintained in poor condition, with obstacles that would discourage casual visitors. Parker's house was in severe disrepair, surrounded by junked vehicles and debris that created the impression of a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Most disturbing were the defensive positions Parker had constructed, camouflaged bunkers and shooting positions that provided clear fields of fire toward anyone approaching the property. When investigators finally made contact with Parker, they encountered a man whose appearance matched the deteriorating condition of his property. At 52, Parker looked decades older, with long gray hair, an unkempt beard, and the lean, weathered appearance of someone who lived entirely outdoors. Parker's initial response to questions about Ben Foster was defensive and hostile. He claimed he had never heard of the missing photographer and had no knowledge of anyone disappearing in the big thicket. When investigators mentioned Claude's witness account, Parker's demeanor shifted to openly threatening. But despite Parker's denials and aggressive behavior, investigators noticed something behind his house that would take on sinister significance years later. An abandoned apiary, a collection of weathered wooden boxes that had once housed beehives. The confrontation with Ethan Parker marked the beginning of the most frustrating phase of the Ben Foster investigation. Despite having a credible witness, a clear suspect, and compelling circumstances, investigators found themselves unable to build a prosecutable case. Parker's 40-acre property was searched multiple times, but the dense forest and accumulated debris made comprehensive searching nearly impossible. Parker had created a maze of trails and hiding spots that could conceal evidence from even the most thorough investigation. Search warrants allowed investigators to examine Parker's house, outbuildings, and vehicle, but they found no direct evidence linking him to Ben's disappearance. The abandoned apiary received particular attention. The collection of old Beehive boxes seemed like perfect hiding spots for evidence. But initial searches revealed nothing more than decades of accumulated debris and rotting wood. Ground-penetrating radar revealed several soil anomalies that warranted excavation, but each dig produced nothing significant. Cadaver dogs showed interest in several locations, but follow-up investigations failed to uncover any evidence of human remains. The searches were complicated by Parker's increasingly hostile behavior. He filed lawsuits challenging the search warrants, began booby-trapping his property with tripwires and hidden obstacles, and launched a campaign of intimidation against Claude Thibodeau that eventually forced the witness to stop cooperating with investigators. By 2019, the investigation had reached a deadlock. Prosecutors acknowledged they had insufficient evidence to charge Parker with any crime. The case remained open, but active investigation was scaled back due to lack of new leads and the enormous resources required to continue searching the vast wilderness. Ben Foster's family refused to give up hope, organizing periodic volunteer searches and maintaining pressure on law enforcement to continue the investigation. His sister Michelle became a tireless advocate, appearing on true crime podcasts and working with other families of missing persons to keep attention focused on unsolved cases. But as years passed without new developments, even the most optimistic investigators began to accept that Ben Foster's fate might never be known. The big thicket had claimed another victim, and Ethan Parker had successfully protected whatever secrets his remote property contained. The case might have remained unsolved indefinitely, but in 2021, events began unfolding that would eventually lead to the most shocking crime scene discovery in Texas history. Ethan Parker's death on March 15, 2021, came not from the violent confrontation he had seemingly prepared for, but from a massive heart attack while working on his property. His body wasn't discovered until nearly a week later, when accumulated mail prompted a welfare check. Parker's death created a complex legal situation regarding his property. With no surviving family, no will, and no estate plan, his 40 acres became the responsibility of Hardin County through unclaimed property procedures. County officials faced the expensive task of cleaning up the hazardous site before it could be sold at auction. The cleanup contract was awarded to Eastex Environmental Services, with work beginning in spring 2023, more than 2 years after Parker's death. The project was massive, involving removal of abandoned vehicles, dismantling of booby traps, and clearing decades of accumulated debris. As cleanup crews worked through the property, they discovered the full extent of Parker's paranoia. Hidden throughout the site were weapons caches, surveillance equipment, and defensive positions that painted a picture of a man who had expected civilization to collapse at any moment. In June 2023, cleanup crews reached the abandoned apiary behind Parker's house. Most of the weathered Beehive boxes were scheduled for disposal, along with other debris. When project supervisor Tommy Graves and his assistant Maria Gonzalez attempted to move one particular box on June 23rd, they immediately noticed something wrong. The box was significantly heavier than the others and appeared to be sealed with concrete rather than the typical wooden frames used in beekeeping. When they attempted to open it, they discovered something that would haunt them forever and finally solve the mystery of Ben Foster's disappearance. Inside the concrete-sealed Beehive box were human remains. The discovery launched the largest crime scene investigation in Hardin County history. Dr. Patricia Martinez, the state's chief forensic anthropologist, was called in to oversee the recovery of the remains found in the sealed Beehive box. The concrete matrix surrounding the bones had been meticulously prepared. Rather than simply dumping concrete over the remains, Parker had created a careful layered system that preserved the bones while completely sealing them from environmental factors. The concrete had been mixed with additional chemicals that had created an almost perfect preservation environment. This wasn't a hasty disposal of evidence, Dr. Martinez explained to investigators. This represents careful planning and considerable knowledge of preservation techniques. The perpetrator wanted these remains to survive indefinitely, almost like a trophy. The recovery process required several days of painstaking work to remove the concrete without damaging the skeletal remains, or the overwhelming evidence of Parker's guilt in Ben Foster's murder created a unique situation in Texas criminal justice history. For the first time, investigators had solved a murder completely, with photographic evidence of the crime and a written confession, but were unable to prosecute because the killer had died before his crimes were discovered. District Attorney Sandra Williams held a press conference on July 15, 2023, to announce the findings and explain the legal complexities. While we cannot prosecute Ethan Parker due to his death in 2021, we can definitively state that our investigation has conclusively determined that Parker was responsible for Mr. Foster's death, she announced. The evidence is overwhelming and leaves no doubt about what occurred. For Ben Foster's family, the discovery provided the closure they had desperately sought for more than 6 years. His sister Michelle spoke emotionally about finally knowing the truth about her brother's fate. For 6 years, we lived with questions and uncertainty, Michelle told reporters. We knew something terrible had happened to Ben, but not knowing was torture. Learning the truth is painful, but it's also liberating. We can finally grieve properly and honor Ben's memory. The Foster family used the press conference to announce the establishment of the Ben Foster Wilderness Safety Foundation, an organization dedicated to improving safety for photographers and outdoor enthusiasts who venture into remote areas. The foundation would work to create better communication systems, emergency protocols, and awareness programs to prevent similar tragedies. 3 years after the discovery of Ben Foster's remains, his story continues to resonate throughout the outdoor recreation community. The Ben Foster Wilderness Safety Foundation has grown into a nationally recognized organization that has helped prevent potential tragedies through improved safety protocols and enhanced awareness of wilderness risks. The Foundation's work has contributed to significant improvements in wilderness safety infrastructure throughout the United States. Emergency communication stations now provide reliable contact with authorities in previously isolated areas. Enhanced coordination between law enforcement agencies has improved response times for missing persons cases. Perhaps most importantly, Ben's story has raised awareness about the psychological factors that can create dangerous situations in isolated communities. Mental health resources for rural residents have expanded significantly, with new programs designed to identify and assist individuals struggling with issues similar to those that transformed Ethan Parker. The wilderness safety protocols developed in response to Ben's case have been adopted by parks and recreational areas worldwide, creating a lasting legacy that extends far beyond the Big Thicket. Every photographer, hiker, and outdoor enthusiast who benefits from improved safety measures carries forward a small part of Ben Foster's memory. Today, visitors to the Big Thicket can follow the same trails that Ben walked on his final day and experience the same sense of peace and connection with nature that drew him to this special place. But they do so with better safety protocols, improved communication systems, and enhanced awareness of both the beauty and potential dangers that exist in America's remaining wilderness. Ben Foster's legacy lives on in every safety measure that protects future visitors, every communication system that keeps outdoor enthusiasts connected to help, and every photograph that captures the enduring beauty of the wild places he loved. His death was senseless and tragic, but his memory has become a force for positive change that will protect countless others who seek the same natural beauty and spiritual renewal that he found in the wilderness. The Big Thicket remembers Ben Foster not as a victim, but as an artist who loved wild places enough to risk everything to capture their beauty. And in the safety measures inspired by his tragic death, his spirit lives on, ensuring that the wilderness he loved will remain a place of wonder rather than fear for all who follow in his footsteps.